Hello and welcome back to Brawler Bios. I am Brian, also known as Malorian, and this is a podcast focused on Warmachine, but more specifically, Brawlmachine. So the format, 25 points, a little bit smaller, and so in each of these episodes, we're going to be taking one of the warcasters we have out there and grading it and analyzing it really just in that Brawlmachine light. Now, we do these every 2 weeks. If you haven't seen the previous ones that we've done so far on Awesome and Helga, please go back to the Line of Sight website. They're all on there, as well as all the rest of the Line of Sight content. But today, the one we're going to be looking at is actually the starter caster for Scorn, and that is going to be Xekaar. Now, the full name is going to be Beast Master Xekaar. It is a Scorn Paingiver Warlock, and what we're going to do right now is we're going to first go through and make sure that we cover all just the regular rules, what this Warlock is, and then after that, we're going to be looking a little bit more into some potential lists, and then grading it based on, does it have answers? Does it pose questions? What's the personal output? Is it good for new players? And is it good for experienced players? So step one, what actually is Beast Master Xekaar? Well, the first stat on here is speed 7. That's pretty good. That's pretty fast for a warlock. Strength 6, mat 7, rat 4. So not the best rat, but it doesn't have a gun, so it doesn't really matter then. Def 16, armor 14, command 8, and then the rule it has is parry. Now, for those who don't know what parry does, it really means that if it's going to be leaving engagement with another model, it doesn't take a free strike. So a very handy rule to have. It is Fury 6. It has 16 hitboxes and also 31 War Beast points. So a whole whack load of War Beast points. That's a fantastic level to be at. Now for weapons, it has 2 weapons. They're exactly the same. And what they are barbed whips. These are going to be range 2, P plus S 10. So not the strongest weapons. However, first of all, they're a chain weapon. So they'll be ignoring things like shield wall, shields, bucklers. So if you're against those, it's basically going to be stronger. It's going to be magical, like most warlock weapons are, and it's also a weapon master. So this means it's always getting an extra dice, and so even though it's not really like this, whenever you're looking at what the P plus S is, it's not really 10, it's more like 13.5. Now, the weapon also has another rule attached to it, and that's going to be Dispel. Now, what that does is when this weapon hits a model or unit, upkeep spells and animi on that model unit immediately expire. So this is just a fantastic way where if you just hit something, boom, any upkeeps on it or animi, just gone. You don't need to cast a spell, you just gotta whip it. So that's fantastic and great to have on the card. The other rules that Xekaar 1 has is Alpha Hunter. So what Alpha Hunter does is really 2 things. The first one, War Beasts in this model's battle group beginning their activation in its control range can run, charge, or make power attacks without being forced. So fantastic. I mean, that's not super over the world, powerful. However, just the fact that you have that fury efficiency where if something charges in, it's not using up that fury, which really almost means it gets an extra attack. So this is not always going to be super grade A, but there's even more to this. We're not even done that rule yet. And the second part is going to be when this model destroys one or more enemy models during its activation, War Beast and his battle group beginning their activations in its control range gain +2 speed and mat for the turn. And that just means that if this caster Xekaar gets out there and is able to kill at least one thing, boom. Not only is this rule making it so that they can charge and run and slam without spending that fury, but they're going to be faster and they're going to be more accurate. So again, a very nice rule to have. The next one that is going to be on the card here is Maltreatment. And what that does is that once per turn, at any time during its activation, this model can remove 1 Fury point from a War Beast in its battle group that's in its control range, and add 1 Fury point to its own current total. So basically, that's great. You get to control the Fury on your Beast, you get to add to yourself. Fantastic. there is one downside. The War Beast suffers D3 damage points. So this is not going to be just a free, Fury management and an extra Fury for Xekaar. There is going to be that D3 damage. So always keep that in mind. Now, last rule on here before we get to spells is another fantastic rule to have, and that's going to be reposition 5. So at the end of an activation in which it did not run or fail a charge, this model can advance up to 5 inches and then its activation ends. So that is a very important rule for this model to have, because as we just saw from things like Alpha Hunter, it wants to get in there. It wants to be dispelling things and proccing it so that all of a sudden its beasts around it can be charging in more aggressively. And if you do that, you're sometimes going to be in problems and you're going to have to maybe just die. Well, not if you have Repo 5. You get to run in there, hit something, do all the proccing you need, and then move 5 inches backwards or to some terrain, whatever you need. So normally you'd be seeing something like Repo 3 on like a Cav model, but no, this guy's really quick here with being speed 7 and then Repo 5 on top of that. Next up, let's go and talk about the spells. Of course, since this is a Warlock, it's also going to have all the animi based on whatever War Beast it has, but it has actually 4 spells in a card as well. Now, the first one here is Dead Weight. It is a cost 2, range 8, POW 12 offensive spell, and what it reads is, when Dead Weight destroys an enemy living or undead model, choose an enemy model within 2 inches of it. The chosen model must forfeit either its normal movement or its combat action during its next activation. So that is a very powerful ability. That is basically Haley 2's feat, but on this spell. Now, of course, there is some workarounds you have to do with that. You have to be able to kill a living or undead model somewhere within 2 inches of that one in order to make it happen. But just think, if they have a very powerful heavy that you can't deal with, but there is one little infantry beside it, boom, you dead weight it, and now all of a sudden it's either going to move or attack. It can't do both. So a very nice situational spell to have on your card. The next one on here is going to be a little bit more of that bread and butter for what the caster does, and that is Mortality. Now, Mortality is a little bit expensive. It costs 3, it's range 10, it lasts the round, it's another offensive spell, and what it reads is that target model unit suffers -2 defense and armor, loses tough, and cannot have damage removed from it. It lasts for 1 round. So this is just a great spell for saying, hey, are you good whatsoever? Well, now you're worse. Your defense is lower, your armor's lower, and just in case you had tough, you don't anymore, and you can't be healed next turn. So all around, a very, very powerful spell, and this is going to be the primary one you're going to be looking at for this Warlock. The next one here is going to be Psychosurgery. It's going to be a cost 2, range self, AoE control, and what it does is that each model in the spellcaster's battle group, currently in the control range, can immediately remove D3 plus 1 damage points. This spell can be cast only once per activation. So normally, if you want to be healing something in your battle group, you can be spending 1 Fury and be removing 1 damage box from 1 model. What we're seeing right here is that if you're really ever going to be doing 2 or more, well, then just be doing Psychosurgery. Do that, and it's not only going to be healing that 1 beast, it's going to be healing all those beasts somewhere between 2 to 4 boxes. So obviously the best case for this is when you're going to be having lots of damage war beasts, and you can kind of like slowly always be healing them. You might not always have the Fury for this, but the nice thing here is that if you're ever in a position where you're needing to think about healing, just do the Psychosurgery, because it's just a better way at doing that. And if you remember the rules from the other side there, where it had maltreatment, well, if you're going to be maltreating your war beast and doing D3 damage when you actually do this, well, it's nice to have something like Psychosurgery so you can also heal it at the same time after you're done doing that. Of course, that doesn't really make sense if you're doing that every turn. Like, I'm going to maltreat, get 1 Fury, and then I'm going to be using 2 to do Psychosurgery to try and heal up. But, just so you know, it's an option on the card. All right, last one on here is going to be Pursuit. It is a cost 2, range 8, upkeep spell that's offensive, And what it says is if target enemy model unit advances during an activation, one model in the spellcaster's battle group that is in his control range can immediately make a full advance. Now, that does not make you immune to free strike. So do know that if something comes after you that you did this on, maybe they charged one of your members of your battle group and you say, okay, I'm going to trigger pursuit and I'm going to go and advance away, you will take that free strike. So do remember that. But at the same time, also remember that Xekaar has parry. So if Xekaar is the one actually dancing away, it means you will not be taking that free strike. So that is really great, especially in the late game. You know, that's something where if you can put onto that one main model that they're going to be trying to close out the game with, you can say, all right, well, either you're going to come in and I'm going to back away and take that one hit as opposed to losing my entire model, or maybe it's on my caster now, and I'm just completely dancing away, and you're getting nothing from this. It's basically like an admonition type spell. However, you have to pick your target beforehand. All right, finally, we have to get to Xekaar's feat, and what it's called is Whispers of Torment. And what it does is, while in Xekaar's control range, enemy models suffer -3 strength, mat, rat, and even threshold. Whispers of Torment lasts for 1 round. So this actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Denegra's feat, except of course the big thing to keep in mind here is that it is only going to be of that control range of 12. This is not a massive control range, and what that really means is that the weakness here is going to be things that are going to be outside of that and then shooting in. Now it says while in this control range, so even though it goes and it reduces their rat, if they decided to walk backwards and leave that, they're now at the full rat and they can be shooting inside. Meanwhile, you know, if they do want to go in there and start doing some punches, well, they're going to be -3 mat, so harder to hit things. They're also going to be -3 strength, so not damaging things as well. And so that is really powerful. It is going to actually force you to bunch up in order to get the most effect from this. But the nice thing is that since we're talking about Brawlmachine, you don't have that many models anyway. So compared to a 75-point game, it is a lot more reasonable that you'll be keeping everything inside of that and then really punishing your enemy if they ever want to be trying to attack you on your feet. Now, there is that one part on there that I do want to talk about, and that's the threshold. So the dream of what you could be doing with that is that you reduce the threshold of your opponent, and then if they can't take off all the fury, they're going to be going and having to take a threshold check, and they're going to frenzy and kind of lose activations. I think that is something that you can think about and maybe always hope for, but I think that's the type of thing that your average gamer will never see. I mean, if you kind of think of the way that the game would have to actually go for this to happen, is at first, they basically have to have an alpha on you, or something where they're coming into you and then getting a whole bunch of fury on the table and going so hot that they have more than what the warlock can be taking back. And then after that, being in a spot where, okay, we're now going to be not killing off war beasts so that they're still in that case when they get to their turn. And only after that, they're going to get to kind of choose where they want to be taking it away and then taking those tests after. So it's really not something you can very aggressively go after. There are a few little jank plays that you can, especially if you take some of those minion pieces that'll actually care about thresholds. But otherwise, this is not something I even would want most people to be focusing on. Whether you're a new player or experienced player, that's a little bit of a trap. So really focus on the strength, the mat, and the rat part of that feat. So okay, that's fantastic. We now know what Xekaar is. So what's kind of a potential list that you can be dealing with this? Now, I had a couple of locals that I talked to, Dorian and Stevie. They both play Scorn, and I kind of said to them, what would you be doing with this? And they both had their own advice, and it was great to see that they were both on the same idea, but both very different. It's one of those things that really shows for Brawlmachine that there's a lot of things you can do with it. With that in mind, the theme that we're going to be going with for this list is going to be Disciples of Agony. Now, that's not because I want to be mocking Scorn and taking a Scorn army that's actually more minion stuff, but it's more so because I want to be taking advantage of some of these very powerful things that you can be taking in this list. One of the things you can be starting to notice already between what the feat's going to be doing and what things like mortality is going to be doing is that you can be layering on a lot of these buffs and debuffs so that you can get a massive armor and defense swing. And it just so happens that sure, there's some things that are nice to have in Scorn, but there's some really great stuff in Minions, especially in the War Beast, that'd be nice to be taking at the same time. And while we're talking about that, I might as well close what I was talking about before, where you could be taking something like the Splatter Boar. Now, the Splatter Boar is a minion war beast that actually has a psychoactive gas attack that can be adding 1 fury. However, that's again playing into a bit of the feat that I don't think is the right way to go. What I would be taking is something more like this. Taking a Battle Boar, taking an Archodon, a Cyclop Brute, a Terrorizer for free, a Warhog, a Willbreaker, a Void Archon, and then also the Beast Handlers. Now, the reason why we're taking all these things is, well, the Terrorizer is just great. It's a great little light you can be taking that also has Rush, so that's making your stuff faster between maybe getting the Alpha trigger going and also Rush. That could be now speeding up your War Beast by 4. That's massive. The Battle Boar is a great thing that can be putting out Primal. That's another way where we're going to be putting on stacks on there for a strength advantage and also Mat for being able to hit. It can also be going through and killing off lots of infantry. The Archodon and the Brute are both models that very well take all these buffs we're going to be giving and taking something that's not usually that threatening and sending it out really far to be hitting really hard. And then finally, we'd probably want something like the Warhog that just normally hits hard, just so that if we ever see something that's a very high armor spike, that even though we have a lot of answers, we want to make sure we can definitely take this thing out. So that's why we have the Warhog in there. Void Archon only adds to this even more, where it can be taking care of infantry, lowering armor even more. The Willbreaker is in there because of Puppet Master. Now, because there's some very key spells here that you definitely want to get off, you want to have something like Puppet Master that lets you re-roll the dice if you ever had a really bad one. So there's lots of options for Puppet Master in this theme, and so whatever one you prefer, go ahead. And then finally, of course, you want to have the Pain Givers because, well, it's a Scorn list and they always take it. And that's because you can be doing things like Enraging, add another 2 strength onto there, prodding it so it can charge without being forced, which I guess that portion is actually kind of a thing that isn't really even needed in this list, actually. You know, whereas normally you're probably used as a Scorn player making sure that your Pain Givers are base to base so that your beast can actually be charging for free. You have to remember that with Xekaar, as long as they're within that control range, which they're probably going to need to be, they can then charge for free anyway. So that's what I'm taking for the list. I think it's a very powerful and also misleading looking army, where if you look at something like the Archodon or maybe just the Cyclops Brute, you're like, well, that thing can't hit that hard, I'd be okay. And then all of a sudden between the Pain Givers, Mortality, Primal, whatever you want to be throwing on there, it's going to be hitting extremely hard. And then even worse yet, you can pop that feat, and then they basically all have +3 defense and +3 armor effectively, since your opponent is -3 strength and -3 mat. So a very, very powerful thing where, you know, maybe even doesn't even make attacks. The Cyclops Brute might just run into their lines, and then again, effectively, it's going to be defense 16, armor 20, and your opponents are going to have a hard time even fighting through that, which really means that you can be setting up for another hard-hitting turn right after that. So that's what I'd be taking for a potential list. So let's start talking about some of these answers. And I gotta say, there's a lot here. Now, it's kind of difficult because you really want to be thinking these things about the caster and not everything else. So even though we talked about things where you're getting rush and you're getting all these other debuffs and things from the list, what specifically are we getting on the card that is going to be having answers to something else? And there's a lot on there, right? It has Dispel, so it's able to go there and just take away any nasty spells that you might be having to be dealing with. It is going to be having that Dead Weight and Pursuit, which is both able to kind of shut down what the opponent is doing. You know, if they have one really strong thing, they're like, haha, you can't deal with this. Well, your response is going to be, okay, I won't. I'm either going to lock it down with Dead Weight, or I might just get Pursuit up so that whenever it comes at me, I'm going to run away. The other part too is of course that mortality, where it's going to be making it so it has less defense and less armor. So if they're going for that defense skew or that armor skew, you could be making those things a lot more reasonable. So, I mean, with all those things on the card, it is pretty good. I think I'm going to be giving this one a B, maybe even a B plus. There really is a lot of things going into this where it can go in and just be answering them. Whether it's a spell that stays on or whether it's a stagnant effect, there's a lot of things that Xekaar can do to deal with it. It can't really be dealing with everything though, and so that's where the limitation starts coming in and stops it from being an A, but still a B+. It's a very good warlock for having answers. Now, what about questions? And I think when it comes to things like questions, some of these spells are going to be coming up again. Things like Dead Weight and Pursuit really says to your opponent, did you put all your eggs in one basket or even on this one flank? Did you think that this one model was going to be dealing with me? Because now, maybe it can't. Maybe it can't because you're going to have to just get locked down here, or I'm going to be backing away, whatever it is. So that is one important question to be thinking about, although sometimes that is going to be too fury intensive. So maybe the threat is going to be more significant than what it's actually going to do, but still, it's a question that's out there. And I think the largest then question that this thing is going to be posing is going to be with that feat, where when it says that whether I'm doing this defensively or offensively, I'm going to be popping this feat, and I'm going to be going and shutting down your ability to hit me in combat. A little bit of range as well. You know, if you can't maybe get all the way out of this, maybe you had gunfighter and you're hoping to be doing the shooting up close, you know, that might be answering there too. But especially if you have any combat portions to this, it's really saying that, hey, on this turn, I'm going up +3 defense and +3 armor. Can you deal with that? And there's a lot of people that can't. You know, if you go up there and you pop this feat, they won't be able to answer the two sides of this, both the defense and the armor, and they'll have no choice but to kind of delay and back away. So that is also very powerful. Now, is it though enough? Is it enough though to take it higher than average? So I would say something around like a C is that kind of average. And even though there's good things on here, I don't know if it really goes too much past that. So I'm going to give it a C+. I definitely feel that there are good things here on the card, and there's lots of good options which are going to be putting out questions, but I don't feel it's anything that's going to be moving it up higher than that. Next up, let's talk about its personal output. So if it gets down to it, and it's now going to be Xekaar versus the last pieces, how well can Xekaar do? Now, I find this one to be very interesting. You know, really what it comes down to is that you have this warlock with only a couple of POW 10s, and POW 10s honestly aren't that scary until you start realizing how threatening this is going to be. The fact that he can go out there early game and be trying to hit something and then repo 5 away. So really you're threatening in 12, hitting something, proccing all these things, hiding away, so that early on you can be trying to kill off these little models in the way and just making things stronger for you. And then at the end, being in a position where you can say like, hey, I got Pursuit. And if this is a 1 versus 1 type thing, you are never going to catch me. I'm going to keep dancing around and hitting you. And at the end of the day, I'm going to win because you just can't hit me back given infinity turns. Although, you know, like you might have to be adding on some extra things like mortality or something like that to actually make this a little bit more significant. there is that he can be more aggressive. Now, that being said, that's only in a world of combat. In a world of guns, if you're facing guns, these things aren't going to work out as well. And we have to realize that this idea of this Xekaar that can be bossing around the field and being a bully only really exists in this world with these singular, powerful combat models that it can actually dance away from. So with that in mind, I don't think it's actually going to be that high. I'm going to give this one actually just a C-. I think I could have actually been really tempted to go down to a D, except for that fact where it can be a bully because it can dance around and have these other abilities. So it's not hitting hard, but it has the potential. So I'm going to go with a C- for that. Next up, we're going to be talking about the grades for the actual players, for the actual users. And the first one to come in here will be the grade for Xekaar for a new player. If you're a new player coming into this, you're like, oh boy, I want to be playing Scorn. How good is Xekaar as an idea for you to be using as a new player? Are you going to walk away from this having a great time, or are you going to be frustrated? And I find this to be a very challenging question to actually answer because there's actually kind of two portions here. On one side, you have these spells that are very interesting, but also high risk. You have to be in a spot where you're setting it up, you're looking for it, you're deciding how you're going to be spending these resources, and also trying to keep Xekaar safe. But at the same time, there's that kind of safety net of the feat, so that even if you're a person where like, I went in and I bumbled the way that I want to be playing this caster, well, at the end of the day, you can just be saying, okay, I'm going to pop my feet and I'm probably going to survive and I can always try again. And so because of that, because there's that part on there where not only we can be like, oh, it didn't work out for me, I'm going to repo 5 away, or it really didn't work for me and now I'm going to pop my feet, I do feel that that's going to be making things, but at the same time, also frustrating in that when you try and do these fancy things, you can very easily get yourself in trouble. So I think with all this in mind, I'd like to leave this somewhere as just like a plain old average C. You know, there's some good safety nets involved in the caster, so that's going to help that newer player not get into trouble. But at the same time, they're going to try these fancy things and probably get frustrated. So depending on the player, if there's someone who likes to unlock these puzzles, they might really like that with Xekaar. And if they're a person where like, you know what, I tried to go in there, I tried to proc off that alpha hunter ability and I just died because I went in there, I didn't kill anything, I couldn't get far enough away, and even with my feet they were able to knock me down and kill me or something like that. So I can understand how that happened, so I'm going to be putting that as a C. Now, how about for experienced players? What if you're going and saying, I am going to be going to a Brawlmachine tournament and I want to be taking Xekaar to it? How good of an idea is that? And I think that this is actually a very good option. I think if you're a person that understands well how to build a list that can be very carefully piling on those buffs and debuffs, that can be very careful in the way that you're going to be using Xekaar, being able to be aggressive enough so you can be proccing that alpha hunter, being aggressive enough so that you can be putting out those different key spells where you need them, but at the same time being seasoned enough that you're not going to get yourself killed, that you're going to know the right time to pop your feet and know the right times. You're like, you know what, I could be casting this extra spell, but I just really need to be camping this to stay alive. And I think that in that case there, I give this one a solid B. This is a great choice with a lot of options, a lot of answers, poses some very strong questions if you know how to use them. And so, I mean, if I'm going into a tournament and I see Xekaar on the other side, I'm not going to laugh and be like, ha ha ha, silly person using a starter caster. This is a starter caster with a lot of tricks that an experienced player can be using to very high effect. So there you go. There we have all the ratings for Beast Master Xekaar. If you have your own thoughts of it, I always love hearing them, so please give me your feedback. As a reminder, we do these every single 2 weeks, so we're going to be right back here in 2 weeks with the next one, alternating back between Hordes factions and Warmachine factions. And so with that, I hope to see you in 2 weeks, and otherwise, we'll catch you later.